What's a story your friend told which you initially thought was bullet, but turned out to be true? My friend in HS told me he was banging the new driver's ed teacher. I didn't believe him until she was arrested. In 9th grade, during the middle of our teenage angst, a friend in our clique was bragging about banging this pretty hot chick. No one believed him until we all found out she had gotten pregnant. Back in elementary school, chubby friend told our group that he could do a backflip on his trampoline. Of course no one believed him as he was one of the most unathletic dudes in the school, or so it seemed. We went to his house after school and let MF hit 6 in a row before jumping off the trampoline and spraining his ankle. He went from 0 to 100 to 0 real quick. My mom swore up and down that she did coke partied with Aerosmith regularly. For years and years she told me the stories about being a groupie and I just didn't buy it. Don't know why, because she lived in the valley and was a major partier. One day we see Joe Perry at the Ritz in LA. He ducking remembered her as soon as she said her name. I'm still not over it. Edit. Disclaimer: I am still in high school. My mom was already in her 30s and married when I was born, so unfortunately I am not any of Aerosmith's offspring. That would be cool though. Also thanks for 4k upvotes. Wow. Didn't expect that. Lol. Own copyright AO and copyright A-ring. Had a friend that lied about pretty much everything. Talked about how he modded his PS1 to make Lara Croft naked. He claimed to have ollied 7 stairs on a skateboard while wearing boots when he was a freshman in high school. Bragged about a bunch of girls he made out with that were just absolutely out of his league. We were the awkward Star Wars nerds and he was talking about cheerleaders. This was like the late 90s when our obsession with those movies absolutely not in fashion. He told us he had a working Simpsons arcade cabinet in his garage. Said he had family members in the mafia because he had an Italian last name and was from Jersey. One day he invites us over to his house to hang out for the afternoon. Cranks up the PS1 and I'm like, let's see some Lara Croft titties. Sir. He says that's another PlayStation that his cousin was borrowing or something. I figured, duck if I can now call him out on some real bullet he was spouting. Asked him to see the Simpsons arcade cabinet and he took us to the garage, and that Methodica had a working Simpsons arcade cabinet in his garage. My friend is a pirate. Like, legit jumped from one boat onto another to start a fight and has piracy on his record. My best friend in college was a non-traditional, way older, student who said she used to be an onstage go-go dancer for Rob Zombie. She's super nice and has a lot of stories like this. Working in a strip club in LA and being paid to pee on a young John Turturro. Working as Sasha Mitchell's nanny and talking to police during the domestic charges. I didn't believe most of the stories until we were hanging out one night and Rob Zombie walked in the side door without knocking holding a gift. An old Super Nintendo he found at a garage sale. 9/11. A co-worker told me a plane just hit the World Trade Center. I said no way. He said he just heard it on the radio. I still didn't believe it. They turned on the TV and I saw the building burning and the second plane hit. Before that I thought it was too crazy. Sad day. Went out on Halloween a couple years ago to a bar. My one friend came back from the washroom and nonchalantly mentions that there's an Australian orgy going on in the washroom. I didn't believe him, so I went in to look. There was about 8 guys all with a thick Australian accent boning on the bathroom floor. This was in Toronto and not in a gay bar. Edit number 1. They made space so I could use the urinal. I went to college in a city called Galway in the west of Ireland. One of my friends there was a native of the city. He often told me this story about a local character called Johnny Muchiman, who was stumbling home from the pub late one night and he spotted a circus set up on the side of the road. So he hops over the wall and decides to go in for a look. He wanders over to the cage where the tigers are kept and sticks his hand through the gap wanting to pet them. The tigers immediately bit both of the man's arms off. Well, I didn't believe this story for any number of reasons. His ridiculous name, Johnny Muchiman. The fact that the tigers managed to bite his arms off in one go. The fact that the man had survived. The fact that circuses apparently still exist in this day and age. None of it remotely plausible. Couple of years later, I had just started working in a late night petrol station convenience store. Late one night, a drunk comes up to the locked front door trying to get in. I point him around to the hatch I'm serving through, but the security guard unlocks the door and lets him in. He tells me this is Johnny. He and the store manager are the only two people you're allowed open the front door for. This seemed odd to me, cause he looked like a random tramp off the street. That's when I realized the guy's sleeves were dangling. He had no arms. That night, and many other to follow that summer, I had to sell cigarettes to Johnny Muchiman. This involved taking money out of his trouser pocket and replacing the change. It also involved opening the cigarette pack, putting a cigarette in his mouth, lighting a match and then putting the cigarette box and matches in his jacket pocket. Postscript. A few weeks later I met a friend of mine who worked as a barman in the city. We got to talking about Johnny Muchiman. Apparently, he drank a lot in the bar my friend was working in. All day in the bar drinking pints of Guinness through a straw. I was giving out, telling my friend how much I dreaded putting my hand into the Johnny Muchiman's disgusting trousers. My friend snorted, looked at the ground and said Ian, what do you think happens when he has to go for a piss? My great granddad was in the British Navy in World War II. A bomb dropped by the Germans landed on their ship but didn't detonate. So my granddad and his friend ran towards it and hurled it off the ship where it exploded underwater. They figured that they were going to die anyway if it exploded, so why not try and save as many as possible in the process. This story went on for years and years and nobody quite believed him. They would all laugh and thought it was just a war hero's exaggerated tale. Until one day he pulled out his war medals and a letter from his captain stating what he had done for the men on that ship that day. Nobody second guessed his stories ever again. I miss him a lot. Edit. He served the HMS Rapid for anyone interested. He claimed that Bluetooth technology was named after a 10th century king, King Harald Bluetooth Gormson. The king united Denmark and Norway, just like the wireless technology united computers and cell phones. That his dad had 40 guitars. This is when I was in high school and everyone was scrounging up money to start a band called Bullet. Went over to his house after school and holy duck. And that's how I ended up playing bass in a Ricky high school band. The drummer knew every chord song but not much else. The guitarist knew Hotel California but not much else. And I knew the bass line from the Cake version of I Will Survive. Yeah. This did not last past summer. At a party in 2008 or 2009, a random guy who apparently had a cousin who worked in Hollywood told me he knew a lot of celebrity secrets. I didn't really believe him and asked, like what? And he told me Tom Cruise and Katie Holmes' marriage was a sham, and they had a contract to stay married for 5 years. I thought it was total bullet and he just wanted attention at the party. But then they divorced after 5.5 years and reached an agreement only a few days after filing. I wondered if there was something to what he said. Two of my friends shared a story about the times that both got drunk and joined the Communist Party of Wales and Communist Party of Croatia respectively. I thought they were both trolling me until they showed me the proof. I both want to and never want to go out drinking with them again. Her aunt took such a huge D that she was partially paralyzed for a few months from the legs down. I worked in a lawyer's office when I finished school, 20 or so years ago now. Really bonded with this one guy who was as low in the pecking order as I was. I think he was some kind of office supply person, whereas I was just the girl that opened the mail. We'd go to the pub for lunch every day, get a nice little buzz going and just talk about random stuff. Except he would always change the subject when I asked about his life before the office. He was a smart guy, really sharp and funny, and I always wanted to know how he ended up ordering post-it notes for a small-time firm of solicitors in Middle England. One lunchtime, he had a couple more beers than usual and started to tell me this story about how he hadn't always been known by the name he was using. That in actual fact he was on the run because his dad was a big-time recreational drug manufacturer and he used to work for him as a dealer. And that one day a few years before I met him they had been raided by the police. His dad went to prison for a while, and they didn't catch my friend because he had long, flowing hair at the time and the team that had them under surveillance thought he was a girl. I laughed it off, figured he was just saying it to impress me or something. Didn't mention it again. A couple of weeks later, we're at his place. He puts the TV on, grabs a VHS tape off the shelf and tells me to watch. It's a recording of a report from the national news about his dad, and they show a bit of the surveillance footage of the mysterious girl who is 100% unmistakably actually my guy from work. All he did was cut his hair and get a job with a load of criminal lawyers. Talk about hiding in plain sight. One of my friends always liked to exaggerate. He once told me he just made like $10k from a penny stock. I brushed it off as bullet until the next day he shows up with a used boat. We lived close to a few lakes, so that was a fun summer. When we first met in high school, my husband told me that he slept in a closet under the stairs in his basement. Thought he was just exaggerating until we went over and saw his bedroom complete with his name on the closet door. Basically, this story was one of those urban legends, you know, that everyone knows a friend of a friend of a friend, but you doubt it's actually true. I met the girl who had the hospital records to prove it. She'd had her nipple pierced for a while, when one day, one of the balls that screws on had accidentally unscrewed and fallen off. Stupidly, instead of just taping the piercing in and buying another ball the next day, she pulled the piercing out, and with it came a long white thing. So she cuts it. I don't know why. It's herself. Vomits. Blacks out. Wakes up in hospital. She cut a nerve. An actual nerve. So yeah, I heard the story from a friend about her friend. Didn't believe it. Met the friend. It's gross. One time some friends and I were in the cinema. Well, one of my friends went to the bathroom, and when he came back, he told us that super hot girls just asked him for his Instagram. We, not being the best looking group of guys, did not believe him. Well, after the movie ended and we went for some food, he got 3 girls asking to follow him on Instagram. Since that day he thinks he is a model. My college housemate came out of his bedroom looking like he had been through the ringer early one morning after we moved into a new place. He told me he had sleepwalked, woke up to a gun in his face at 3 AM, ran the wrong direction, and ended up almost at Walmart, 2.6 miles according to Google Maps, before a guy came out of his house who called his police officer brother-in-law. The police officer drove his home. Didn't believe he had made it that far. But I drove to Walmart later and saw a house that was the exact description my roommate had given me. Then throughout the day both the cop and the homeowner came to check on him. He has a history with sleepwalking, but not 2 miles. There are no rats in Alberta, Canada, a landlocked province. And if you see one, you are to report it to the Rat Patrol, and they come out in full force to remove said rat. Alberta's Rat Patrol, $ Department Dep Docs NSF Allagdex 3441. It's actually a thing. That he was recruited to play football at Notre Dame. He was from a very small area. I called BS, and was proven wrong. After looking into it, he held a lot of offers, just didn't have the grades. That his friend rolled a blunt full of hair and smoked it for $20. There was video for proof that I eventually saw, and it was disgusting. So, my friend who I work with always seemed to tell little white lies. He's half Filipino, half English, and on his birthday last year, he said he received a card at work from a guy called Wolfie who literally ran in, dropped the card off and ran out. I didn't believe this until it happened again this year. A couple weeks ago after watching the CCTV footage. The card read, "Dear Chinese boy who works here, happy birthday, Wolfie." That was it. Nobody knew who Wolfie was, nor how he knew my friend or his birthday. He also dropped one off at Christmas, and this guy Wolfie runs in with his hood up, drops the card at reception and runs out. Super weird. I worked with a guy who had insane stories about his super hot boyfriend, his rich uncle who lived in Texas, and his frequent trips to go see his favorite football team. I always kinda indulged the guy. I figured we worked at a Ritty chain grocery store cashiering, and he had nothing better to do at work than fantasize about a better life. Until he came in off shift with said super hot boyfriend and showed me selfies they took from the pro football game they'd gone to a week earlier. Dude was really living his best life. Edit. Thanks for the silver stranger. I went through a breakup one time, and kinda went crazy. I took all my money out of the bank, bought enough supplies to last me a good while, and disappeared into the mountains of Georgia. When sophomore year of college came around, I changed from a psych major to a biology major because I had lived out there for 2 months. No one believed me until my dad was visiting my dorm and thanked me for all the deer meat I had given him when I came back. A man I met told me he works with rockets. Thought he was just lying and trying to impress catfish me. Turns out, he's an aerospace engineer at NASA and is now my fiance. That an ex cheated on him, so he slept with the other dude's mom as revenge. My friend arrived to my 5th grade class and told me she had 13 siblings, 1 dead, and moved most recently from Jamaica. All true. When we first became friends, she told me her family has tigers and a bear as pets. Kid in grade 4 said he had all 3 Egyptian god cards from YUGO. Thought he was lying until he brought them to school one day. From that day on he became a legend. My boyfriend was half Chinese and told me his Chinese grandparents kept entirely black chickens with black flesh. I showed him Stardew Valley and it reminded him of it, and I thought no, surely not. But I researched it and yes, entirely black mother cluckers do indeed exist. I had a high school college friend who was normally a good AF dude but had anger problems when he drank. Call him Julius. His GF cheated on him and left him for one of his other really close friends. Call him Mark. A couple weeks later, Julius was at a party. He got drunk and wandered off. Mark's car was parked a few blocks away from that party and was found vandalized and broken into. Julius swears up and down he didn't do it. I said I believed him but was really skeptical. Just seemed like something he'd do when drunk and it was a lot of coincidence. Police talked to him a couple of times and Julius is in the process of lawyering up. Next weekend comes and there are several more vandalized burglared cars in the same neighborhood and they caught the guy on video doing it. Definitely not Julius. I honestly couldn't believe he didn't do it, but he was telling the truth. My big brother and his friend used to regale me with stories from their time in the military, and one of the main characters was this Paul Bunyan type who was always the strongest, fastest, baddest of them all. Many were his feats and exploits. Later on, when I was in college, my best friend actually used to tell me the same stories from the time he was in the military, and wouldn't you figure, they were the same stories of the same guy, only this time my friend was the star. I used to feel bad for him that he had so little self-esteem that he would pretend to be what I already knew was an urban legend. But I never let on. My friend struggled a lot with depression and went on to kill himself. The devastating weekend that I went to his home to help his mom and girlfriend pack up his stuff, I found his stash of military mementos. There in the pile was concrete evidence of every over-exaggerated adventure I had ever not believed. I had been friends with the man my brother and his comrades idolized, but had never put 2 plus 2 together. And I had always referred to him by his nickname and not the full name they knew him by, so they never guessed either. I had talked about my friend as the kindest, funniest, most generous and sensitive person I'd ever known, but also as a person plagued by insecurities and feeling he was never enough. My brother's clan had spoken of him as a fearless hard ass who would stop at nothing to get a job done. We never realized we had the same guy. There was even an oil portrait of him commissioned by one of his senior officers, who made a habit of having paintings made of his favorite recruits. The ones he said would have portraits in the National Gallery someday. He would pay thousands of dollars for 2 original oils, so the story was told, and give one to the soldier and keep one for his Hall of Fame. The painting was in the back corner of my friend's closet, leaning with its face to the wall. It was signed on the back by the colonel, who called him a true leader. He died feeling alone and unappreciated. He was everyone's rock but never felt he could lean on anybody. If only I had believed who he was. I know I could have had dozens of grown-ass, accomplished men by his side making him feel like a king, telling him all about how he inspired them. It was a huge lesson, is all I can say to defend myself. And since it's Ash Wednesday, I'll add that every Good Friday, when they get to the part about the Roman soldier who crashed to his knees beside the cross and cried out, "Surely this was the Son of God." I know the feeling. I'll never forget the looks on the faces of my brother and his best friend when I told them how stupid we all felt at having thought ill of this man. My brother and his friend thinking he was a weakling who couldn't handle his problems, and me thinking he was inflating his own ego by talking about how great he was. Kinda like folks say about Jesus. TLDR, be careful who you underestimate. Full stop. Adam West was sitting in my section and was my table to serve. A friend told me that James Cameron had been working on a film called Avatar for over a decade, and when the technology finally caught up with his vision, it would overtake Titanic at the box office. Challenger just exploded. Other way around, I was on a charter boat fishing, and on the way back I finally got cell service and decided to check the news. Prince had died. I told my friends on the boat who were fairly drunk and one of them would simply not believe me. He even bet me $100 that Prince would still be alive when we got to dock. I wouldn't take his money due to his state. My favorite was when he finally read the news for himself and solemnly stated but he was so little. That one can get high off nutmeg. That his uncle worked for big tech company and had access to all the latest tech. Thought he was bullying until I went around his house and his uncle was there showing off the latest console months before it was due to hit the market. Had a friend in high school who told everyone that his dad worked for a big tech company and that he got phones way earlier than everyone else. It was either Samsung or Apple, I forgot. Nobody really cared until he went on YouTube to review said phone and got his dad fired from the company. My brother once claimed his friend was one of some 41's band members' cousins. I didn't believe him until I happened to catch an interview with another one of the band members' sisters on MTV whom I recognized as one of our neighbors. Turns out they used to practice in a garage across the street from us. He's a tattooed metalhead who claimed that he grew up on a hippie commune in Northern Cali with Timothy Leary and Winona Ryder. I called Bullet. One day at work I was called to the floor. Thought it was a potential interviewee but it was just Winona who called me out for calling Bullet on mic. It was one of the most embarrassing and amazing moments of my life. Years ago, 1988, a new guy got hired at my work. Within days he's talking all kinds of crap. One of the biggest tales he told was that his sister had dated AXL Rose. He said that AXL came over all the time and watched movies with his family and just hung out. I called him out about it, and he says he will bring in pics the next day. The next day comes and he says he couldn't find them. We of course were like, sure you can't find them. 4 days later he brings in like 100 pics of himself with AXL and the rest of his family. We never doubted the guy about anything else lol. We became friends later, so I figured that would count Neo through a copyright airing. When he was a kid at school, he had to attend to wear formal-ish attire to attend an end-of-year prize-giving ceremony. Trouble was, he'd outgrown his only decent pair of shoes and his parents were too poor, or just reluctant, to buy a new pair when he would probably grow out of them before the new school year started in September. The only smart, black shoes that fit him were his daddy's tap shoes, so he had to tap his way from his seat, through the auditorium and up to the stage to receive his prize. I always doubted this story a tiny bit until my friend moved and left me all his books. I found an old Peanuts annual that his mum had dedicated to her little Fred Astaire in recognition of his good behavior. Showed it to him later on and he confirmed that she'd bought it as a bribe for wearing the tap shoes. Having sex with his cousin and GF. Had a friend tell me he was going to Cedar Point for a weekend. Ended up being gone for a few months. When he gets back he casual tells me he was ran over by a semi at the camping grounds they were staying at. My buddy from college used to say he was a hacker and that he broke into several high profile websites. I was like sure dude. Half the people in CS say that it. One day we got drunk in his room and I saw him break into some women's college website to replace every employee's photo with Sasha Gray's photo. I also saw his name in the Google App Security Hall of Fame. He was the real deal. Learned a lot of CS from him the next few years. A friend of mine used to tell stories about his past that sounded too exaggerated to be true, so I didn't really believe him. Until one time we met an old friend of his he hadn't seen for 10 years over coffee and she was like, hey remember when you single-handedly knocked out that whole biker gang? And my friend replied, but I knocked out only the ones taller than me. And she replied, but they all were taller than you. I must have looked like the Pikachu meme. My old CS Go teammate ended up being a character in the Six and the City movies. That he had a fire truck in his backyard. Years ago, two of my friends were telling me about this web series called Laser Fart. They explained the premise. Something along the lines of a guy gets hit with some radiation and suddenly here's a crime fighting superhero who farts lasers. Oh, and Jack Black is in it as a supervillain. So yeah. I was more than a little surprised when it turned out to be real. It's still a running joke between us that the show doesn't exist. Friend told me once that when he was at school assembly someone stole a stall wall from the boys' bathroom and no one was caught. My friend in high school said she was on a Smashing Pumpkins album cover when she was little. I didn't believe her, but she was a dead ringer for the girl on the left, wearing wings, on the cover of Siamese Dream. So I figured she just said that to be cool because things were infinitely harder to disprove before we had Google. Met her parents later. They confirmed it. That his citrus tree was producing lemons, limes and grapefruit and was called a fruit salad tree. Google it, I did. When I get friends I'll let you know. Flip side of this, I have a pretty massive Lego collection, a full-sized arcade, custom built, and a ton of video games. I'm pretty much a huge child. I have kids. My youngest is in 1st grade. She tells her friends about all her dad's Legos, the arcade, yada yada. I get home right as my wife shows up with my youngest and her friend. The little friend has this smug look of I'm going to put this lying it in her place, I can just read it on her. I didn't say anything. Let me youngest and her walk in first just so I can see this little its jaw drop. It was magical.